All right, buckle up because we are ditching the wagon trains and taking a detour on this deep dive. We're veering off the well-trodden Oregon Trail to uncover a road less traveled.
Oh, a road less traveled, you say? I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
We're talking about Lindsay Applegate and his firsthand account of the South Road expedition. This wasn't just a journey west, this was forging a new path through the heart of the wilderness.
And a necessary one at that. Let's not forget the state of the established Oregon Trail back then. This wasn't just about a quicker route, it was about survival.
Right. Picture this. It's 1846, tensions are simmering between the U.S. and Britain, and to make matters even more complicated, the Hudson Bay Company, they've got a chokehold on the Columbia River route. You've risked everything to come this far, only to run smack into possible international conflict. A&D, a company that, well, let's just say they weren't exactly handing out welcome baskets to the competition.
Absolutely. And on top of all that, you've got increasing conflicts with some indigenous populations. And frankly, who could blame them for being wary of these newcomers encroaching on their land? Yeah, no wonder folks started looking for another way around.
And talk about another way around. Applegate's account, it's like having a front row seat to their journey. Imagine, you're right there with them. Sun beating, scorching. The terrain, brutal. Jagged peaks on one side, a dizzying drop into a ravine on the other. Every step is a risk. Every turn could hold, well, who knows what.
And more often than not, those unexpected encounters, they could turn dangerous really quickly. Just look at Applegate's account of Captain Levi Scott and Garrison's run-in near Mud Lake, a grim reminder of what they're up against.
Talk about intense. So Scott and Garrison, they're scouting out a possible shortcut, right? And they come across these two indigenous individuals. And at first it seems, well, maybe not exactly friendly, but not openly hostile either.
It's tricky because communication, that was a major obstacle. You put yourself in that situation, misunderstandings, they could escalate in a heartbeat.
Tragically true in this case. So as Scott and Garrison, they're trying to use sign language to communicate, but suddenly the tension, it just explodes. And out of nowhere, they're ambushed. Garrison, he's tragically killed. Scott, he's wounded, but manages to fire back, killing one of the attackers.
It's a heartbreaking story, but, it really underscores why finding a safer passage was so crucial. And the South Road expedition, they actually achieved something pretty incredible. They discovered rabbit hole springs. Can you imagine weeks in this unforgiving landscape, parched, desperate, and then you stumble on this spring, water bubbling up from the earth?
It's like finding an oasis in the desert. Come on.
Talk about a game changer. It was a turning point. It proved that a southern route, it was possible.
Yeah.
But Applegate, he doesn't sugarcoat it. Even with rabbit hole springs, later travelers, they still faced unbelievable hardships.
Yeah, no easy way out, right? And it makes you think about all those unsung heroes, the ones history books tend to forget. Applegate mentions a few, like Levi Scott, who we just talked about, and John Jones, or Jack, as he was known.
And these were the guys on the ground, instrumental to the South Road expedition, but their stories, they so often get lost in the mix.
It really makes you wonder how many other Jacks and Scotts are out there. Their courage, their contributions, they're woven into the fabric of Oregon's story, but we'll probably never know their names. It's incredible how these personal accounts can transport you back in time. But let's switch gears a bit and explore a different angle of Oregon's history. The kind that makes you question those grand tales we often hear.
Ah, you're talking about separating fact from fiction, right?
Yeah.
Always a worthwhile endeavor.
You got it. We're diving into a book called A Short History of Oregon, and let me tell you, it pulls no punches when it comes to debunking some myths.
It's a good reminder that we should always approach these historical narratives with a critical eye. Things aren't always as straightforward as they seem, are they?
You can say that again. Take the name Oregon itself, for instance.
Yeah.
It's practically synonymous with the Pacific Northwest, but its origins, well, they're a bit of a head-scratcher, to say the least.
For years, the credit went to Jonathan Carver, an explorer, for being the first to use Oregon. But this book, oh boy, it throws some serious shade on that claim.
To put it lightly, it suggests that Carver might have, shall we say, borrowed the name from earlier French explorers. A bit of plagiarism, perhaps.
Quite possibly. The book really digs into the evidence, pointing out all these inconsistencies in Carver's accounts. You walk away seriously doubting his claims.
So much for giving Carver credit where it's not due, right? But that still leaves us with a mystery on our hands. If it wasn't him, then who actually coined the name Oregon?
And that's the most interesting part. The book, it lays out all these popular theories, picks them apart one by one, but it doesn't actually offer a definitive answer. We're left with this lingering intrigue. Some historical puzzles, I suppose, they're just destined to remain unsolved.
Okay, so we've got a mystery on our hands. But this book's myth-busting spree doesn't stop there. It also tackles the story of Astoria, John Jacob Astor's fur trading post.
Right? The one that ultimately failed. The typical narrative paints it as a classic David versus Goliath situation. This ambitious American entrepreneur going up against the mighty Hudson's Bay Company, only to get crushed.
But it sounds like there's more to it than that.
Oh, absolutely. A Short History of Oregon digs a little deeper and argues that internal conflicts within Astor's own company played a significant role in its downfall, too. Mismanagement, unfortunate circumstances, it all adds up.
So it wasn't just external pressures, but also their own internal struggles that brought down Astoria. That's a new perspective.
Exactly. It's a good reminder that history is rarely black and white. It's full of nuances. And speaking of nuance, the book introduces us to a figure who embodies that perfectly. Dr. John McLaughlin. Have you heard of him?
The name rings a bell, but refresh my memory. Who was this McLaughlin fellow?
Well, he was the chief factor of the Hudson's Bay Company at Fort Vancouver. The top dog, you could say. He had serious influence in the region.
So not exactly the kind of guy you'd expect to be sympathetic to American settlers then, right?
And yet that's what makes McLaughlin such a fascinating character. While he was clearly dedicated to serving the Hudson's Bay Company's interests, he also had this surprising compassionate side. He would often go above and beyond, even going against company policy at times to help struggling American settlers.
Wait, hold on. He's helping the competition. What's the angle there?
It seems that McLaughlin, he was driven by a deep sense of humanity. He saw the human cost of westward expansion firsthand, and he felt this moral obligation to help those in need, regardless of their nationality.
Wow. Talk about a walking contradiction. Here he is, a leader in this powerful company, yet he's supplying these American settlers, giving them medical care, even employing some of them.
It seems that for McLaughlin, his personal convictions sometimes outweighed his loyalty to the company. Can you imagine the internal conflict he must have grappled with?
It really makes you think about how complex these historical figures were, caught in the middle of such a transformative period. We've covered a lot of ground here. Pioneers blazing their own trails, historical myths going up in smoke, and even a company man with, well, maybe a heart of gold is pushing it. Let's just say a surprisingly strong sense of compassion. It's amazing how these stories, even from such different perspectives, they come together to paint a much richer picture of Oregon's past, don't you think?
It's like a tapestry, all those individual threads weaving together to tell a story that's bigger than any one of them.
And speaking of threads, one thing that seems to run through both Applegate's account and A Short History of Oregon is this incredible, almost stubborn persistence. These folks, they just refuse to give up.
Absolutely. Battling the elements on the South Road, navigating the cutthroat world of early Oregon politics, it didn't matter. These folks were driven to carve out a life for themselves in this new land, no matter the cost. Setbacks, hardships, tragedy even, it didn't stop them.
It really makes you appreciate that grit, that resilience those early Oregonians had, doesn't it? It wasn't just about getting by. It was about building something that would last. But that makes me wonder, when we talk about history, whose stories are we actually telling?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? One we should be asking ourselves constantly. Both of the sources we've looked at today, they highlight these individuals who are absolutely essential to shaping Oregon. Yet their names, you won't find them in any textbook.
It's so easy to focus on those grand narratives, right? The famous explorers, the politicians, the big events. But we forget that it's the everyday people, the unsung heroes who lay the groundwork for all of it.
Think about that South Road expedition again. Applegate mentions Levi Scott and John Jones. These guys, they faced incredible dangers, endured unimaginable hardships. And for what? So their contributions could be relegated to footnotes in the grand scheme of things.
It's like a giant puzzle. We're missing all these pieces. And until we find those missing pieces, those forgotten stories, we're only ever seeing part of the picture. We forget that history. It's made up of individual journeys, choices made by real people, and those are the stories that often get left out.
And yet those journeys, those choices made centuries ago, they still resonate in the Oregon we know today, don't they? The trails they carved, the settlements they built, even those sometimes harmonious, sometimes conflicted interactions with indigenous populations, it's all there, shaping the landscape, the economy, the very identity of the state.
It's like those early chapters. They're still being written. Their echoes are still whispering through the valleys, bouncing off the mountains. So where does that leave us? Those of us trying to make sense of it all, trying to understand the past.
I'd say it leaves us with a responsibility. to look beyond the surface, to search out those missing voices, those untold stories, to acknowledge the good, the bad, the messy, complicated truth of it all. Because it's only by understanding where we came from that we can even begin to figure out where we want to go.
It's been quite a journey, hasn't it? And to everyone listening, we hope this deep dive has sparked your own curiosity, given you a few more questions to ponder about those hidden stories that have shaped the world around us. Keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and until next time, keep diving deeper into the fascinating depths of history.